Hello and welcome back. So this video is hopefully just going to be a quick update on two specific things. I've been posting videos about my cube list as it's going along and being built. And the first thing that I'm going to talk about is I've decided to add custom cards to my cube designed by me. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is I'm having a card design contest so that you guys can make cards and hopefully, the best ones make it into my cube as well. There will probably be some prizes along with the contest, but I'll explain that in the second half of the video. The first half is going to explain what's in my cube, and that's kind of important because part of the design contest is like, if you want a card to end up in my cube, it's got to fit into the cube. So I'm kind of showing where I'm at in the design and what cards I've made. So if you want to make something specific for that, you can, but also the design contest is more general. So if you have your own cube or you want to make your own cards that maybe would see play in a cube, you can submit those to the contest, no problem. But first, we're going to talk about my cube. So the motivation behind adding custom cards to the cube is that I kept looking at my vintage cube list and I was trying to balance it by colors, because the problem you have when drafting vintage cube is you just end up with blue soup. Everyone wants to be in blue. Blue is by far the best color. And I think it really comes down to having these three cards in the cube, because blue gets access to effects that are at such a higher rate than any color gets access to, that it makes it basically, if you're not drafting blue, you're at a disadvantage. And the only reason not going blue makes sense is because other people are drafting it. And that just leads to an unhealthy format. So I like the effect of these cards. They're very fun to play with, but it just is so unbalanced. And there's no cards in Magic that are at similar rates, or at least very few. And so the motivation behind the cube started with, well, trying to say, let's spread out this power to each color. So what I'm trying to do with my cube design is basically there are three effects here, and they each have a pretty unique characteristic. Ancestral Recall is an effect that is card advantage well above the normal rate. Time Walk is an effect that is tempo well above the normal rate. And then Mana Drain is an effect that is like removal / an answer that is well above the normal rate, and it puts you very far ahead. And so the motivation in my cube is to basically, within these three categories, make sure those are filled for all other colors. So I'm going to show you the examples that I have gone through so far. They're not all finished, but maybe it'll help you get a better idea. We'll start with white. So white, it actually has very efficient removal. I only showed Swords to Plowshares, but Path to Exile, basically having both of those cards together kind of gives white removal on par with Mana Drain. It's impossible to balance it perfectly, but like white has very good efficient removal. There's no effect that destroys a creature more efficiently than Swords to Plowshares. But I've added Reversal of Fortunes and Time Fracture to essentially play the role of Ancestral Recall, Time Walk in white. So Reversal of Fortune says, if an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw cards equal to the difference. So it's, it's not straight up card draw, but this gives a more of a white flair to the effect where, maybe you empty your hand very quickly turn one and then draw a bunch of cards up, or the game has gone late, your opponent's playing a counter deck or like a control deck, their hand is full, yours is not. You can just fill up. This card might be too strong, and that's the important thing to note with custom cards is like, if this card's end up being too strong, we can make it cost more. You can change how much the effect costs so it plays well, but the effect itself, if it's interesting and fun, which this feels like it is, I think is an okay thing to have. The next thing is Time Fracture, which is literally the analog of Time Walk. It is end the turn for 2 mana instead of take an extra turn as an instant. Time Stop exists at 5 mana. This is significantly cheaper, and this is essentially just the white shifted Time Walk because Time Warp exists at 5 mana to take an extra turn, and it's safe at that range. So this is basically just a very pushed version of Time Stop for white. So that hopefully gives you a feel. We'll go through other colors and maybe it'll be more clear what I'm trying to do, but basically by having these cards exist in white, you're not always drawn into blue trying to get more power. In green, for example, I only have 2 cards. I haven't quite designed the Time Walk effect yet, but one with the Universe is a take on Glimpse of Nature. This says, until end of turn, whenever you cast a creature spell or play a land, you draw a card. And this is important because I want to make creatures stronger or more useful in this cube. So I'm putting more creatures in there that are fun to play. And then the second is lands is going to be an archetype. So like Exploration, Fast Bond really buffs this card up, because I think Glimpse of Nature wasn't even really playable in Vintage Cube. It wasn't in the cube. But being able to, at the very least, like play this, play land, play creature and draw 2, and then like the ceiling is much higher, I think makes this card, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly equal in power level to Ancestral, but it gives green an effect that can get a very strong amount of cards in a short period of time. The green mana drain analog is quite interesting. It's turn target permanent or non-creature spell face down, and then if the spell was turned face down this way, it was countered. Essentially what this is, like the flavor wise, is that I needed green to be able to interact with the stack, because like there's just no way it will ever be balanced to mana drain or like the answers blue has. And so this felt like a way to do it, where you're essentially turning their spell into a creature. It's kind of like Beast Within for creature or Beast Within for spell permanents, right? If you turn any permanent face down, it's a 2/2 and they can only flip up creatures basically. So it just gives green this like really strong, useful answer that helps them interact and keep up with, like, you know, if your opponent casts Time Walk, you can turn it into a 2/2 in green. And it just lets you interact with decks in like a higher tier. I'm not going to make a bunch of effects like this, but I wanted green to at least have one answer that they would be excited to pick up. And then I haven't quite figured out what the green Time Walk would be yet. So, you know, if you want to design for those, that's definitely an open space in the cube. Here's kind of a showcase of the black cards. I haven't quite settled on the black card draw spell yet, but what I'm thinking about is making black-red sacrifice an archetype, which would make Ritual of Blood very good. This is an instant. I think I might template it to be an enchantment. All these cards are in process. I mean, designing a custom cube is kind of a continuous effect, but I'm just kind of showing where I'm at. And this is black instant. Until end of turn, you gain sacrifice a permanent, draw a card. There's a lot of ways to word this, but essentially I want it to be able to trade permanents in play for cards in hand, because there are a lot of interesting and cool things you can combo with this, which we'll get to later on. For the black Time Walk, this card's actually pretty interesting and it might need some balancing, but it's a 3 mana 2/1 flash flying. When it enters the battlefield, each permanent that would enter the battlefield under an opponent's control enters the battlefield under your control instead. So if you cast this in response to their like big creature or big effect, you get it. And then when she leaves the battlefield, each player gains control of all permanents they own. So it's not that bad. You can play her as a creature, steal their thing temporarily, like a Sower of Temptation, and that's fine. If you evoke it, however, she enters and then leaves before you can take control of anything. So her first effect still works, but they don't get to gain control of things back. So if you spend triple black, essentially this is like Fractured Identity in black, where like you just steal their spell and then they can't play anything else. So I think that type of tempo hit is very similar to Time Walk in a sense. We'll see. It felt very black anyway. And then black has also a good suite of answers: Hymn to Torok, Sinkhole, Fatal Push, Innocent Blood, all that type of removal. So I think it doesn't really need a new card to push it up to mana drain power. I'm not quite finished with red yet, but I'm at least quite happy with Guerrilla Warfare. So this card is the analog of red Time Walk, and it reads, for each permanent type, gain control of up to one target permanent of that type until the beginning of the next end step. Untap those permanents and they gain haste. So essentially it's like threaten for each permanent type. And then if you cast the spell during your turn, untap all creatures you control, you get an additional combat step in main phase. So this, you can't steal something an opponent controls and then get 2 combats with it, because if you cast this during your first main phase, then you only get 1 creature on tap. But if you cast this during your second main phase, then you get 2 creatures on tap. So the idea here is basically, you cast this card, you steal your opponent's best things. Most of the time it's going to be just a creature and land, because there's not too much on the battlefield. So you can get basically like a 2 mana threaten, and then attack them with it. And that's a fine base rate. You can sacrifice the cards to the black-red sacrifice theme. But what makes this card, I think, decent is like, if you're ahead on board and your opponent has nothing you want to steal, at the very least you can cast this to get an extra combat step, which is similar to casting Time Walk in terms of like how strong of a tempo hit it is. So I like that the base rate of this card is that you get 2 combat steps, which is something red very much wants. But the ceiling is very high. So imagine this card's an instant, right? Imagine you cast this on your upkeep with Smokestack active. You have like 3 Smokestack triggers. You steal your opponent's like Thran Dynamo, land, and a Planeswalker, and then you just sacrifice all of those to your sacrifice trigger, and then you hit them with their their creature that you took as well. Like that's a really, really strong and interesting tempo hit. that this card provides. So it's a really cool red feeling card. It might be too good at this mana cost. I want to keep saying what I want is the effect. If this effect ends up being way more broken than Time Walk, I don't think it will be. You could always make it cost more mana or make it weaker, but I wanted to, for every card I'm designing, start with the strongest, most interesting effect. And then in playtesting, you can kind of figure out, okay, we can tone this down a bit. So that's the red Time Walk. Rain of Sparks is a card I love. I love Gut Shot. I want Gut Shot to be good enough in Cube, and this card hopefully is good enough to be in Cube. So the base rate is Gut Shot. It's Phyrexian to do 1 damage to any target, and then basically it is multi-kicker red to get more copies to any other target. So you can basically do 1 damage to a bunch of stuff, 3 to 1, 1 to another. I think this card is going to end up pretty good. At the base rate, it's 2/2 and 2 red and 2 life for 3 damage divided as you choose. I think most of the time that's going to be how it's cast. Or you can, in mono red, spend 4 mana for a Lava Axe to your opponent's face. It's just a really versatile card that I think will be pretty useful. Maybe not on par with Mana Drain, but red also gets a bunch of other things like Lightning Bolt that kind of at least give red some type of answers. And then the red card advantage engine, I haven't decided on yet. So another avenue that needs to be explored. So anyway, those are all the broken cards. Again, I don't want all the cards in the cube to be that strong. This is something I'm trying to stress. The only intention behind making cards that strong is so that every color has a draw, similar to how being in blue and opening Mana Drain feels awesome. I want it to be the same when you're in red and you open Guerrilla Warfare, and then you can steal your opponent's stuff and sacrifice it. So it's more just trying to balance the colors so that each color feels fun and exciting to draft. But that's not all. I'm making the rest of the cards probably more complex than the average Vintage Cube card, but I think they're not broken in any way. They just play well. So here's one example of a card I just recently designed and I love it. It's Artington the Brave. He's a 2-mana Armadillo Knight creature. He's a 1/5 because armadillos have a lot of toughness, obviously. And he has this cool ability. The effect that I really wanted on this card was discard a card to investigate. So it essentially gives every card in your hand cycling 2. But he's also a good discard enabler because there's going to be like a mono white or like a black-white reanimation archetype. So it's a good way for mono white to get access to discarding. He creates tokens, which are good to sacrifice permanents for other things. Like if you're playing black-white sacrifice or black-white stacks. And then he has this minor text. Whenever he deals combat damage to opponent, create a treasure token. He probably will hit them maybe once. So I could even just remove that. But it felt like I wanted to give some incentive to, you know, get in for damage into your opponent with your 1/5. And just as an example of what mono white reanimation might look like, here's Formless. It's a card, whenever you cast it, you may exile target permanent card in a graveyard. If you do, Formless enters the battlefield as a copy of that card, except it's a 2/2 creature. So this is kind of like a similar power level to Reanimate in that you bring a creature back for 1 mana, but this can hit more things than just creatures. If you want to take your opponent's Gilded Lotus, you can, if it's in their graveyard. But it enters as a 2/2 creature, so it has Summoning Sickness, and then obviously they can like Lightning Bolt and kill it or whatever they want to do. So I think this is a pretty interesting and cool take on like what mono white reanimator might look like. So you can go like turn 2 Artington, discard a card. You should discard like Nicol Bolas Planeswalker, for example, and then play Formless. He will have the Planeswalker activated abilities. You can uptick him or whatever. And then he's kind of susceptible to being removed as a 2/2 creature. So it's a high risk, high reward play, but it seems like it would play out kind of fun. I may have to change how this works with the rulings on some things, but that's kind of the idea of the effect is you bring back anything, but it's a 2/2 creature so they can kill it if they want to. Another important aspect of this cube is that colorless is being treated as its own, I'm putting color in quotes, you can't see it, but it's being treated kind of like its own color. So normally, when you draft a cube, you only get access to the 5 basic land types. You get Forest, Plains, Island, Swamp. This is probably not the best example, actually. Let me pull up a different one. But there will be a 6th Mox that taps for colorless. That is also happening. Here we go. So the way I'm handling this 6th color, in quotes, of colorless is because Wastes right now does not have a basic land type. So I'm going to template out this new basic land type, Locus, which works with like Cloud Post. I'll pull that up in a second. But basically, Locus is to colorless as Forest is to green. So Locus, by default, in this particular cube, will be able to just tap for colorless mana. So I guess I don't even need this in there. And so this gives colorless its own like sort of identity. And then it obviously makes Cloud Post, I'll pull that up now, a playable card. Here it is. So Cloud Post comes into play tapped, and it adds 1 to your mana pool for each Locus in play. And this was essentially the motivation behind choosing Locus as what I would like the colorless land type to be, because this card seems like a really fun effect to have in cube. It's kind of like Tellurian Academy, but for lands, and it rewards you for going into colorless in like a kind of fun and unique way. So colorless will be in the cube. There's more cards that are like this one, for example, that cost heavy colorless, because the Locus, or essentially like wastes, will be in the cube box. So you can take a mountain and a Locus, put them into your deck, and have access to colorless that way, for example. So I'm making colorless cards. It's a full archetype. I want the Eldrazi to somewhat infiltrate into the other colors. We'll get into that later on, but here's an example of one colorless card that I think is pretty cool. It's create a token that is a copy of target non-land permanent with CMC 3 or less. It gains Devoid, and when this enters the battlefield, exile all other permanents with the same name until this leaves the battlefield. So it's like a clone that when it enters gets rid of their card until they kill your card, which is kind of cool if you're stealing like a Mox or a 3-mana Planeswalker maybe. You just get like a cool effect. And then it's a modal double face card, so you can play the backside. And one thing I really want to be part of the colorless identity is having a lands archetype, similar to how I'm having a lands archetype in the cube list that I talked about before. I want to find a way to fit more lands into there. So the thing that I'm trying to do and test out is putting utility lands on the backside of other cards. So this is essentially Vesuva. You may have Image in the Mirror enter the battlefield tapped as a copy of any land on the battlefield, or you can just play it to tap for colorless. So this whole effect is this really cool card where like you can steal their permanents or copy their lands, and both sides are quite interesting and useful. And because we have colorless as a 6th color, the mana fixing gets more interesting, right? Because it makes things more demanding to cast. So I'm trying to probably not make colorless like have an equal share of the color pie to the rest of them, but I kind of want to make it feel more like it's infiltrating the color pie. So you get more like hybrid cards and Eldrazi creatures. And so as a way to help that along, I'm making Eldrazi Scions somewhat more of a common thing to see. And that way you can use the Scions to get colorless so that you can splash your high power colorless card. Because I think on average, the colorless cards are going to be a little bit stronger, but somewhat ubiquitous throughout the cube format. So to accommodate that in each color, I've created a demigod. They're all similar. They have Devoid, and they all create Eldrazi somehow, and they all sacrifice an Eldrazi to have an effect. So the flavor behind this is sort of that the demigods, at least within their color, somewhat rule over the Eldrazi Scion, but maybe they still have to serve like what Emrakul wants. But it gives you a useful way to create Eldrazi and something to do with the Eldrazi. So I'm very happy with Tystra. I guess there shouldn't be a T there. I think it should be Tysra, Demigod of Balance. It's a 1-mana 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, you make a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion. So it's 2 power for 1 mana. It's actually very strong, but it is spread over two permanents. And then you can sacrifice an Eldrazi to counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. So it's like a Mana Tithe on a body. It's a really good, strong turn 1 play. And then the black one is Zixtra, Demigod of Nightmares. Discard and stacks are going to be part of the cube. And this says whenever a player discards 1 or more cards, you may exile those cards and create a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion. And then this lets you pay colorless and sack an Eldrazi to draw a card. Essentially, the idea here is that you draw 1 card for every 2 Eldrazi you create if you want to, because you can sacrifice 1 Eldrazi to make the colorless mana, and then sacrifice the second to draw a card. So this one, I'm hoping to be kind of an archetype enabler for mono black discard, or you splash this in a different color and you can start drawing cards off your Eldrazi. But there will be a demigod in each color. I think I have the red one templated out right now. Yeah, here he is. So he's templated out after Goblin Rabblemaster, and probably will just replace the Rabblemaster because he says Eldrazi you control attack each combat. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you make an Eldrazi Scion and it gains haste. So that's essentially Goblin Rabblemaster for Eldrazi. But then his last ability lets you sacrifice an Eldrazi to do 1 damage to any target and then 1 damage to you. So it's a strong static effect, but he is a creature, so if you kill him before combat, he actually does nothing. And that's something that I'm trying to work with in this cube is I want to increase the utility or strength of answers and removal. That way you can put strong effects like this on a card, right? If you let this sit and play for a long time, you're just going to die. And that's true for Goblin Rabblemaster, that's true for a lot of the creatures that I've shown. So I'm trying to make creature removal more useful, maybe not necessarily more powerful, but less of a cost to put into your deck. So I'm going to show next I've kind of templated some modal double-faced cards as a way to allow you to put removal in your deck that's somewhat situational, but then when you don't need removal, you get a nice utility land. So here's my first attempt. I don't think this card will end up in the cube. We kind of decided that printing a card with the literal name, like a literal magic card, is not great, but I kind of wanted this effect. So here's the card. Dethrone is essentially Hero's Downfall, right? 3 mana, destroy target creature or planeswalker. I added the little bit of flavor. If a permanent destroyed this way was legendary, create a treasure, because it just fits with the art and the aesthetic. And then the idea is like you've dethroned someone, so the backside is a tomb, that is a swamp. And so like Hero's Downfall is a decent card in Vintage Cube, but you're never very excited to play it. So sometimes you don't even take the time to put it into your deck. And Urborg, you know, each land is a swamp in addition to its other types. Again, it's a card that you'd probably put into your black deck in a draft, but you don't necessarily want to spend an entire draft pick on it. It would go late in the draft most of the time. So my hope is that by putting both of these on one card, you get this reactive card that it can be removal if you need it, but in a pinch, if you need lands, you can just play this side. So that way, you know, putting Dethrone in your deck isn't as much of a cost. And that way, by having cards like this, one in each color, I'm hoping that just putting removal, like decks will have more removal without being too reactive. Because a very easy way to lose the game in Vintage Cube is have your deck full of answers and nothing proactive. And this kind of counteracts that, where now you can have answers and or be proactive if you want to. I'll show you the red one next. So here's the red one. The front side is Immolate. I actually think this effect is quite strong. So it's 3 mana, deals 3 damage to any target, and then each player makes a burn token. It's an artifact with, at the beginning of your upkeep, this deals 1 damage to you. Now, there are quite a few ways to sacrifice permanents in the cube, so a lot of the times the burn token might be like beneficial to your opponent. So it's not just like a Sulfuric Vortex that does 1 damage every turn. There are plenty of ways, with black-red sacrifice being a theme, for your opponent to deal with their own artifact burn, but at the very least it's kind of like 3 damage, kill something, they maybe take 1 damage during their upkeep. If they can't deal with it, then it, you know, kind of gets out of hand. And then the flip side, I might need a different utility land, but the idea is like, I kind of want marginal impact utility lands on the back, where like, you play this a lot of times just as a red source, and then if you become Hellbent, you can start pinging things for 1 damage if you have no cards in hand. So the idea is, you know, if you need lands, you play this, and then you get some effect later. If you don't need lands, Immolate's just a pretty good all-around card. Alright, so I'm almost done. I think there's like maybe 2 more slides of cards I want to show. I really would love to just spend like 2 hours showing you every single card I've designed, and I'll probably do that once the cube is finished. But it doesn't make sense to talk in length about a card and then, you know, I decide it's too strong or needs to be cut from the cube. So we'll save that for when the cube is done. But I just wanted to give you like a feel for what types of cards I'm designing and kind of what my goal is for this cube. These 2 cards I want to show as examples of kind of the direction I would like to take the cube. So we'll just read them. Beast of Burden, it's a black-white card. I don't know about the name, but the effect I like. It says each turn, spells cost 1 more to cast for each non-token permanent that left the battlefield that turn. And then for double colorless, you can sacrifice a non-token permanent to create a colorless 1/1 Eldrazi Scion creature token with sacrifice this creature. So basically the idea is like on their upkeep, you can sacrifice something to make spells cost 1 more for them. If they like crack a fetch land, for example, then their spells cost more. So it's a really interesting like hate bear that taxes them, but that also fuels your own black-white sacrifice theme. And then Experienced Alchemist probably needs a little bit of balance, but we're trying it out as this. It says whenever you cast a spell, create a treasure token, and then sacrifice 5 permanents, gain control of target permanent until the beginning of the next end step, untap that permanent, and it gains haste until end of turn. So what I'm showing here, again, this effect might need to be toned down to like non-creature spell or something, but the idea is that these cards, when they enter the battlefield, they don't do anything. And I want that to be kind of a theme going forward, is like the cards in this cube are independently pretty strong and they have very high synergy potential, but they're also disruptible by removal, right? If you cast Experienced Alchemist and then your opponent kills it in response, you can sacrifice 5 things to gain control of something, but you get like a threaten effect and that's about it. Same with Beast of Burden. If you play this, your opponent kills it, they don't really get any advantage. So I want threats that are fun and synergistic, but they trade 1-for-1 with removal if your opponent's ready, so that you can kind of increase the potential power level without making it so that, you know, what's an example? Like your opponent plays Teferi, they bounce your thing, they draw a card, and then you kill Teferi. Well, they've already drawn a card off the Teferi, so by you killing their Teferi, you're slowly falling behind. By printing cards like this, at least each card, if you answer it, you're still staying at parity on the game. And that, to me, feels like it'll be more interesting. To make that work, I'm going to have to make answers a bit stronger in the cube, which is why I made the modal double face cards, and I'll show just a few examples. Again, none of these cards are necessarily ending up in the cube, but this is just more an idea of how I think things would be fun to play. So I'll show 2 examples of like slightly improved answers for a format like this. So here, they're also kind of an attempt at like giving colorless an identity. Force of Balance is for sure going in the cube. I love this card. It's literally Force of Will, but you can exile a colorless card in your hand instead of paying the casting cost. And most notably, lands and artifacts are colorless. So this is a Force of Will that any deck can play. And I might just replace Force of Will with Force of Balance or have both in the cube. I think having effects like this make for a more healthy format where if your opponent is trying to do something like super degenerate, you in any color now have at least some hope of stopping them. And then I might make a cycle of like on color colorless hybrids that is just very efficient removal. So this is exile target non-land permanent for 2 mana instant. It's very good, but again, I want answers to be good and threats to be good. So there's this tension, and interactive gameplay is really what I'm trying to push. And by making the creatures have activated abilities and the spells deal with one thing, you get this really interesting interaction, which I'm hoping to, I guess, kind of cultivate throughout this cube. Anyway, that's enough of those cube cards. Now we'll talk about the card design contest. So the card design contest, the deadline for this contest is January 15th. It started in my Discord. They actually had like a 2 or 3 weeks extra time to prepare. So if you want to be part of this, I'm making contests probably every other month. Definitely join my Discord. There's a link in the description so that you can get notice of these in advance. So the deadline is January 15th. The format is cube. So I want cards that are designed to be played in cube. It doesn't have to be my cube. You can design a card for your own cube, commander cube, unhinged cube, whatever you want. But in your submission, you have to say like, this is designed for this format, because I'm going to assume vintage cube if you don't say anything. So that way it'll help me like evaluate power level and stuff. The prizes for the winners is a signed proxy. So I'm going to hand sign the proxy and then send it to you of your winning card design, which will be really cool if like you want to put it in your own cube, or things like that. Or another option is if your card ends up in the cube, you can, well, we'll just say I'll send you a signed proxy of your design. I don't know how many winners there are going to be. I'm thinking maybe like between 3 to 5 will get signed proxies, but I don't want to specify in advance and then get just like a complete like 10 astonishingly good cards and then have to like rob 5 people if they're winning. So I think basically the prizes, there will be at least 3, as long as I get like real submissions. I think so far I've had enough submissions where there are at least 3 people who will get a signed proxy. But if I get like 10 amazing cards, then I'll send 10 signed proxies to people. So it's kind of flexible depending on just who submits what. And then the other benefit of this is some of the designs may end up in my cube. Because of the nature of the contest, I don't want everyone forced to design cards specifically for my cube. So you're welcome to design cards for any cube or just general cube. But if you want a card that you designed to end up in my cube, then you have to like kind of look at the archetypes, maybe ask me what I'm looking for, and we can talk about it in the Discord. So that's the rough outlines of the card design contest. Oh, right. And there's 2 submissions per person. So each person can submit up to 2 designs. And because I'm allowing up to 2 designs per person, I will not be able to talk about every single submitted design in the video going through the card design contest. But I figured it was worth giving people more flexibility. So there's a lot more in my Discord about this. I have the rules listed out here, but I'm just going to go through briefly for those who are confused. If you join my Discord, how this will work. So there's a bunch of, you enter, we have our whole custom magic card section. And the way we have it set up is we have a requesting feedback tab where you can submit cards that you are looking for feedback on. So I also post here, right? I just made this formless card. There's a lot of really cool cards, like Bazaar Merchant seems sweet. I don't even know how to say that, but some of these cards are like really awesome. And so if you're not sure what type of design you would like to make for the contest, you can post your card here, I think every 30 minutes or so, and then people will be here to give you feedback on your cards. There's also just a general custom cards discussion tab. And then if you want to submit your card to the contest, you post it in card contest submissions. And I have the rules pinned up here, kind of what I'm looking for, a brief outline of what the base of my cube looks like, and things like that. You're also welcome to just ask me what I'm looking for, because as I'm going through, the archetypes are kind of changing. And if you want to fuel, I have a tab called Caleb's Cube Designs, which is where I basically just put all of the cards that I'm making. I've made so many. Or at least all the ideas that I've had for cards go in here. Some of them aren't loading. And so if you want to get just an idea of like what my cube might look like, this card I love. It's Better Trinket Mage, 1 mana, 1/1 Cascade. It's so good. You can look through here and get ideas and talk to me. So the contest, again, it ends the January 15th. The format is cube. The winners will get a signed proxy of your design once I figure out how to make proxies and send them to you. This might take a bit to get out, but I will do it. And then 2 submissions per person. I'm going to go through the top best cards. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do the voting yet, but I think it's going to be community vote to decide who gets talked about in the video, and then I'll decide who gets the prizes and things like that. If you have any questions, feel free to hop into my Discord and talk to me there, ask people in the Discord, or just comment on my YouTube video. And I'm really looking forward to the cards you guys make, because the end goal with this cube, I guess I should definitely talk about that. The end goal with this cube is to template it so that anyone can print out these cards. You can build this cube at home yourself if you want to, just like printing them on paper and play with them. But I also want to set up a community in my Discord where we do online drafts, or maybe we plan in-person drafts if there's enough people here. You guys can, like, if enough people live in like California or Seattle and you want to get together and draft the cube, you definitely can too. So I want it to be a community project. All of the card contest submissions are going to be open source. So like once you've submitted a card to the contest, it's going to go into this archive of fan-made cards that anyone can pull from to put into their cube or anything like that, which I think will be really useful if you're just trying to, spice up your deck a bit. You'll have, look at all these cards people have submitted. This card, that art is beautiful. I don't know where they got it, but that is fantastic. Same with this card, is like, it looks so good. So there's going to be so many cool cards, even if you don't win, that you're just helping build the cube and custom card community up. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun too. Anyway, I think this video ended up kind of long despite my best intentions, but thank you guys for watching, and I'm very excited to see what you guys come up with the cube. See you guys there.